Chapter 6. Prowling plants now hunt their prey. From stalking huts scruffs ran away. A broth of foul and fetid juice, dissolving branches, roots and shoots. The yard of Bogwater Brewery was muddied, sodden and churned by the constant ploughing of Scragg's feet whilst he made his bin juice tonic. At the centre stood the bath, used for brewing the juice. Around the edges of the yard, up against the uneven stone walls, were many stacks of barrels. They were either full of tonic or soon to be. Scragg's shack leaned against the cliff face. The roof was made from bits and pieces of wood, rusty metal, and itskitch wool. Its stone walls were held together by a thick, dried paste of mud and muck mortar. In one corner sat a furnace made from cobblestones, from which a twisted chimney spiralled out from the top. Scragg blew his own glass bottles, which were misshapen, brittle and brown, but could hold the bin juice tonic for as long as it took to sell. The secret of glass making had been discovered long ago by the first Scruffs, who had built the town in happier times, when Scruffs were caring, clever and clean. Since then the Scruffs slowly became corrupt, and the recipe had long been forgotten, found, borrowed and hidden, swapped, stolen and sold, until it ended up in the hands of Scragg, who had memorized it, then eaten the paper it was written on. The yard's doorway bulged, full with roots and vines, which had stopped before entering the yard. The plants had touched the soil from their roots and were burned by the toxic trash juices. It had seeped from many spilt barrels and bathtubs into the mud over many years, enticing desperate Scruffs to eat the mud in hopes of a free taste. A small passage began to open through the thick wall of roots, which sizzled and wilted into a brown, sludgy soup. Scragg poked his head through the gap. He emptied his bottle of bin juice as he emerged. "As I suspected, I found my yard," he crowed smugly.
"Now, nobody touch anything." Ah!
Scragg was surprised by a firm shove in the back, knocking him over, face first, into the mud. A large bundle of scruff squeezed together through the hole in the fence. With a loud pop, the bunch broke through. They landed on top of Scragg, then broke apart, each scruff rolling away in a different direction. Scragg eventually recovered and sat up. He swayed in a daze from side to side, as a large shadow fell upon him from behind. He slowly turned his head to investigate. Suddenly, Munch popped through the fence, rolling forwards and squashing Scragg once more. Onto them both stepped Gibgob, wearing the usual scowl upon her face. She gazed around the yard, blowing a sharp snort of air from her nostrils as she bounced off Munch's back. Scruffs had spread out around the yard, picking up and inspecting various objects for value, and generally being their nosy little selves. Gibgob was attempting to open the door to Scragg's hut. She peeked through the cracks in the door to gain a better view of what lay within. Munch was scooping handfuls of bin juice from the bath up to his beak, slurping and guzzling the juice. Tin Can was chasing after a Scruff, laughing maniacally as he chopped at a large flower which had grown upon its back. Scragg sprang to his paws and began to run around the yard. He pushed most of the Scruffs away from his stuff, herding them towards the bath at the centre of the yard. Munch wouldn't be pushed, so had his foot stamped on, which made him yelp and hop around. Once Scragg had rounded up the Scruffs into a crowd, he began to tell them his plan. I have many bottles to fill with juice, tubs and barrels to pour on roots, but first we each need to take a bath." "A bath? No way! I've never been clean.
and I never will be,"
announced Gibgob haughtily. The other Scruffs grumbled and mumbled, for they all loathed cleanliness. Contrarily, they loved the smells of rot, mould, and muck, body odour, and smelly foot.
"No, you silly, stupid Scruff. We're going to bathe in a bath of grot,"
said Scrag, pointing to the bathtub, which was full to the brim with the brown and green slime of bubbling bin broth. Dead flies floated on the surface, the smell too terrible for even them. "Munch go first. Munch wants tasty bath," he said, stepping forward and licking his beak with his wide, lumpy tongue. He raised his arms and jumped high into the air. His enormous body cast a huge shadow over the crowd, before crashing down with a hard sploosh straight into the old tin bath. The flying juice splashed everyone, making sure they all got their bath. The flowers and leaves growing upon their bodies began to turn brown and brittle, withering, then dropping from their wet fur onto the floor.
"Now we can dirty down the town with my toxic tonic, available to buy at a low, low price," insisted Scrag, who slyly smiled and rubbed his hands together, waddling away towards a stack of barrels. The Scruffs were busy brushing the last flowers and plants off their bodies, too busy to notice the giant house plants from Bog Lane creeping up the hill over the rooftops behind the gate. It kept quiet, carefully placing its tendrils and roots, smiling a devious grin of wonky wooden beams. Down into the alley it crept, then over the wall and into the yard. Scrag was busy knocking on his barrels, listening for the deep thud of a full one. The sound made him smirk, for it was the sound of profit, of shiny, golden stuff for which he could trade then hide away from the other greedy Scruffs. He hugged the barrel and wheeled it around, quickly letting go when he saw the houseplant. He hesitated for a moment before finding his voice. It was hiding behind his quivering tonsils. "Sweet stinking crud!"
cursed Scrag in terror.
"Leave me be! Eat the others instead!"
He grovelled loudly, alerting all around to the plant's presence. The Scruffs froze where they stood, turning their heads to look up at the prowling plant, which towered over them, swaying and swishing its terrible tendrils. The massive, monstrous hut opened its doorway wide. A long rug tongue unrolled and dangled, slurping the air. It lurched down at them, snapping its door shut. The Scruffs scattered, escaping the wooden jaws just in time. They fled in all directions, confusing the houseplant by running beneath its sprawling roots and hiding around the yard. Munch pounded over towards Scrag, who had frozen in fear behind the barrel of bin juice. Munch grabbed the barrel and hoisted it over his shoulder, turning to face the ferocious abode. The houseplant rose high above Munch and Scrag, its door wide open, ready to pounce. "You look thirsty. Have some drink," quipped Munch to the humongous houseplant. Munch spun on his paw, swirling around and around, picking up speed before flinging the barrel high into the air. The house caught the barrel in its doorway and chomped it down, as Munch zigzagged away dizzily. The plant hovered over Scrag and ferociously banged its door. Just as it was about to strike, it felt a strange sensation coming from a room within. The barrel had burst and spilt its juice, which washed over the floors and seeped into the roots. The plant writhed as it turned brown and brittle, then withered away, leaving its wooden shack shell hovering in the air. Scrag shut his eyes tight, clenching in anticipation as the empty house fell towards him. Through its doorway he disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. The shack hit the floor with a rumbling thud, collapsed, and spread across the yard. Once the dust had settled, Scrag wiped the look of disbelief from his face shook the dust from his fur, and waddled away to get another barrel. Unfazed by the monstrous shack's sudden attack, the thought of shiny stuff quickly returned to his mind. He tapped the barrels of juice and carefully filled glass bottles to sell. Slowly but surely, every scruff in town showed up to buy them, to spray their homes with the toxic tonic. Soon most of the town had been covered, and nearly all of the plants had withered and died away, leaving a few giant house plants roaming around, which Munch hunted down and threw barrels inside of.